I've never heard an answer that wasn't exciting. And there've been Republican ranchers, there've been just a huge diversity of people. And everyone has answered the question with something that seems to be or create a more beautiful world. So that indicates a kind of oneness, that everyone's yearning for this, and we all have really bad strategies. But we all want this, and that's an exciting piece. The one thing about a vision that can be complicated, Black Elk said, a vision without work is a dream. So we all have these amazing visions, but then we bump up against our agreed upon reality, and then we become cynical or give up. Black Elk also said, work without a vision is drudgery. So even in a great organic CSA, after weeding the monoculture carrots for the 100th time, it starts to be drudgery. But a vision with work is what transforms ourselves in the world. So we have this very large ceiling of global transformation, but our 7 areas of work that we do daily to make sure that we're actually bringing the vision down to the planet are 7. We have 7 areas. It's the 7 S's, so people can remember them. And the first one is self-transformation. That there's never going to be a bioregional diet if we don't work on our own transformation and our own willpower. There's never going to be the end of the war when I still have hatred and judgment inside of my heart. That's the first area. And we have morning meditation, and we have well-being meetings. We work on the whole person. We work on the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, and the mental. We have guests come in. We just went and did a week training on anti-racism in St. Louis connected to Ferguson. So constantly churning up ourselves and trying to self-transform. And that's in the Gandhian triad, which we follow. As the first is self-transformation. Becoming, I can guarantee that I can become. I haven't been in a car for 15 years, and I bike, and I live under the poverty line of war tax. That's the only thing I can guarantee and control. And so I'm creating a ripple. So that's primary here. It's easy to say, this institution should change. Wendell Berry says, one person becoming the world they want to see is worth 1,000 people demanding the industries and the institutions to change. And nobody's holding you back except yourself. You have a big litany of excuses. Yes, I've been held at gunpoint. I've been arrested. I've been thrown under the bus by my family. It's often not an easy road, but as Kahlil Gibran says, when you step into love's threshing field to live the vision in each of your hearts, you will laugh more laughter and you'll cry more tears. But you'll walk away from the half-numb world where you'll only die having laughed half your laughter and cried half your tears. And it's your choice, which is great. You don't have to wait for the Maharishi University to change. I've been fired from jobs and kicked out of institutions. I just evolve and accept the consequences. And you can do the same thing. The second S is social transformation. So if I'm just a limited bubble, it can become a self-centered act. So we have 2 areas of self-transformation and one of social transformation. One is social engagement, and the other is social action. So social engagement is next week, the Rot Riders from the university that bike around compost, they're coming here to do a bike workshop. We put in 16 gardens down at the food bank. We volunteered at the food bank for a couple months. We kept feeding the rural poor food that we wouldn't eat, but we made relationships, and after relationships said, hey, we could maybe grow a garden and get fresh vegetables. And then that shift happens by building a bridge. You can imagine if the first day I showed up and said, I'm not feeding them this junk. What are you people doing? You're killing people. That would have been really uplifting. They would have been like, oh, great. We're giving people the justice of eating. So how do we actually go in and celebrate? You're feeding people. I don't see any of the permaculture projects in the area feeding the poor. So, hallelujah. And how do we work together to increase the positive impact to life and to people? So that's one. The other one is social activism. I'm wanted in the state of Minnesota. I blocked a barge with fracking material because I was invited. People called to the Possibility Alliance and said, "You're not using frack gas. Please come to the action." There's 300 folks, the biggest mass arrest in Winona's history. And so we were asked to come as a witness out of 300 people. There was only 3 people in the audience that were not using frack gas. And so we were trying to say, hey, let's do a direct action on ourselves. When we were blocking the trucks that were going to the barge, the owner came out and was really upset. It's like, hey, we're getting fuels from America instead of the Middle East where there's war. Like, this is actually better. And I said, hey, he's got a good argument. You're all using this gas and you're blocking this truck. And then I told him I don't use frack gas. And he turned and said, you can be here. And he turned to everyone else. And that kind of piece of like social activism is how I'm refusing to make him an enemy. When the police arrest me, we're refusing to make them an enemy, saying, hey, I know this is your job, and going peacefully and having a wonderful conversation. So social activism is that we're going and risking our lives and our bodies and our reputations to put a monkey wrench into the systems that are not creating the world we want to see. So that's social activism. So the first is social self-transformation, and out of that you move, you build your fearlessness, and then we move to simplicity, which permaculture is our guiding science for that one. It's a subset of our simplicity, but it's important to realizing it's interior simplicity also. Meister Eckhart also said the soul grows from subtraction, not from addition. That how do I realize that to be simple exteriorly, I have to be simple inside. If I have all these addictions and cravings, I will never live the permaculture principles. Let's take chocolate, for example. I haven't purchased chocolate for over a decade. I'm still had been tempted when there's like dumpstered chocolate to be like, well, it's dumpstered. But actually, it's the inner simplicity of nothing. I don't want any item to have control over me. I want the simplicity to be at peace. The joy is inside of me and not fall for the illusion that it's outside. Doesn't mean that chocolate has a wonderful culinary history. We all know it's delicious. And we use this word sacrifice here, which is actually from the dictionary. A lot of Western people, I used to sacrifice. Forget it. My life is going to be miserable if I live the permaculture principles. Sacrifice in Oxford says, giving something up of lesser value for something of greater value. So chocolate has lesser value to me than a bioregional diet. It doesn't mean it has no value. It doesn't mean it's bad. The minute we become bad and shamed in the ecological permaculture movement, we become useless. It's simply, that's of lesser value to me. You have to decide what is of greatest value to you and what's of lesser value. Modern society, I think, teaches us to put way more energy in things of lesser value, not of no value. So that led us to not going to restaurants and not going to movies and choosing, okay, we're not going to movies anymore. We want to be entertained. So the interns put on a puppet show. That's part of their training, is making a puppet show to entertain ourselves. We had a Winter Olympics. We had synchronized sledding. We had 40 people on the hill. And then we become creators again. So this simplicity is also a cultural one where we're so passive. We watch the YouTube, we watch. When we create music or create things, something dynamic happens that the best movie cannot replicate. 2 years ago, a good friend's like, I'm going to the Hobbit for my birthday, and I don't care about you possibility people telling me I can't go to the movies. We were like, hey, we're going to put on the Hobbit for you, for your birthday. And we put on the Hobbit, and we had a big dragon and these special effects, and he finished it, and he actually, from a deep place, said, I don't need to go see the Hobbit, because what I just watched is not a replicated thing. It's a unique thing that will never happen anywhere else. So how do we trump, with beauty and creativity, trump what is already being offered but just has a high cost? So Simplicity has a really dynamic one, because it's not just about growing your own food. It's how do we do that with transportation, entertainment? How do we do that with healing? So that's Simplicity. And then we move on to the next S, which is service. That if we're just this 160 acres and having a great life here and we're forgetting about other folks, service is not activism. We separate that. Service is meeting people where they're at and serving what they're requesting. So a neighbor's house burnt down, and we biked up there with hand tools, but built a very mainstream house with carpet and glues. His house burnt down. He was 90. It was going to be winter. Service is not going up there and being like, we'll build you a straw bale, but forget this industrial piece of crap. When we choose service, that's social engagement, where you're going out with an agenda. We're going to help start a bike shop. That's coming from us. Service comes from the other. So we rebuilt this man's house using hand tools, biking up, and at the end, with tears in his eyes, after weeks of helping, he came up and he said, everyone's been coming to me great, but the fact that you came means so much to me, because I know how you live. And service is simply an act of love that creates bridges. So service, I think it's really important when you go out in the world to see, am I doing social engagement and activism, or am I doing service? Because when you cross those, it usually doesn't go well. So that's service, and just asking our towns, what do you need? And then we choose, are we going to do it or not, as a pure act of service. And then we have solidarity and anti-oppression work, which after we got involved with the Ferguson and Black Lives Matter movement last year, and when we went down there, people went down there, we realized we overtly didn't have solidarity and anti-oppression work as one of our 7. And what we learned down there is if you're not openly anti-racist, you are a racist organization. And that really struck a chord with us. Just if we're not overtly taking on racism, we are participating in institutional racism. That if I was African American, having broken into police cars and put people in the hospital, I would be in prison right now. That for the same crime, 7 more people of color go to jail than if you're white. And I have friends who are white and collegiate who've been busted with bags of marijuana that if they were of color, they would have thrown away the key. And so we are realizing how racist we had been for the first 7 years of our experiment, simply because we weren't overtly taking on the institutional and mass incarcerations happening in the country. And it's really hard because we're trying to take on sexism, and as a white male, it's really humbling to realize I'm perpetuating violence at a project like this if I'm not taking on privilege, sexism, racism. So solidarity means we have no idea what to do. We just walk down and say, hey, we're here are the resources, we're open to learn. We have no idea what to do. It has to emanate from women. I have to learn to listen to women and how to serve, and also people of color, because it's not my worldview. So I'm going to be making up some white savior story of how to help the inner city. So it's new, and it's real racking our hearts. We had incredible tears. We worked with an amazing group, which I would recommend getting to Maharishi, called Crossroads. And they do trainings for institutions to look at the institutional racism within them, and it was very powerful. So that's a new one that we added since the Ferguson uprising. And then we have sing praise, silliness, celebration. So we realized we really want to cry all our tears but laugh all our laughter. So we have a Department of Homeland Spontaneity. We have a Director of Fun. We try to also enjoy. We have a Shabbat ceremony on Friday where we just share our joys and give thanks. We have gratitude circles. And the final one is sharing. We are all volunteers here. For our permaculture class, there is no charge. It is not free. That's a capitalist notion. It's a gift. We have 10 to 20 people who come and cook. We get local food. There's a permaculture center. It's a 20-acre campus right next door where we host. And people come, and it's a gift. If you're in debt, you gift it forward by starting maybe a permaculture garden in your city. Or you come back and volunteer. So we have removed any socio-economic barrier for people coming here. We're doing a timber framing class. We've had the leader in restorative justice come from Brazil and do a 5-day training as a gift. And that's one that we realize we want to share. In permaculture, we see if a pond withheld water, everything below would die. Nothing's withheld in nature. This tree is dropping its leaves. It's part of the cycle. It's creating only food and benefit, and then when it dies, it drops and gives its body. And we wanted to create an economic system that there was no withholding. So this is a challenge, but any extra money that you have in the bank right now is being withheld. You can be really creative. I have some friends that actually give no interest loans to startup projects, so they still hold on to the resources for their dream, but then it's constantly, that's how the Peace and Permaculture Center happened, and the Land Trust or other neighbors. Friends just said, hey, here, instead of being in the bank, I'd rather have my $30,000 with you starting this incredible project. You have no debt to the bank and making banks obsolete. So how do we realize that all energy needs to flow through a system to make it dynamic? And this is a challenge that always comes up with the university. Is how could you have the Maharishi University function? It's a interesting design. But we create limitations here because we host over 1,500 people. We have 14 adults and 2 children, and we run on under $9,000 a year. Because we cut our wood, we have no fuel costs. We grow our food. We have only 3 bills a month, and each of those could be. We designed it so we could not have any bills. The only things that we have is we have some rural water coming in, even though our kitchen and houses are hooked up to rainwater for droughts and other things. We have bulk organic food coming as locally as possible because some meals we're hosting 70 people for a meal, and we can't grow it all with our limited numbers. And we have the telephone. We have 1 landline. But we also set it up that if we ever have nothing, we can turn off the landline. We can shut down the bulk food and just reduce visitors, and shut down the water, and a small group would be able to boil water. Right now it enables us to have more people come through, but we set it up that we could function with 0 money, except for $600 a year, which is our land tax. So creating systems that you don't need this input frees us up to really explore the neo-tribalism, like intertwining. And we're abundant. The gift economy needs creation economy. The more we tie into this gooseberry, or we walked by the spring beauties, which has an edible root, the more we tie into creation, our firewood for heating, the less we need the industrial economic system. And the more we tie into relationships, Sarah and I have no house insurance. If a tornado hit our house, people would be like, you're screwed. My mom, who's a nurse, is like, what are you doing? But we have hundreds of families around the country that would take us in joyfully. That's called relation economy. Instead of an insurance company that I don't know making profits, I have relationships and I have to be dependent. It's terrifying living here because we're dependent. If I don't cut the firewood, we're moving out in the winter. We can't afford, we don't get enough donations to buy a $15,000 gas heater, nor would we do it. So I'm dependent on survival from my community members. And that's what we saw in indigenous cultures. And that becomes the fabric. The simpler we are, the more we need community. The more you simplify. If you don't have a tractor, you need each other. Anything else? There's this great quote, and then we'll walk on and start to go from patterns to details. So someone asked the history of the land, just real quick, and then we'll start moving around the land. we, my wife and I met. I had just given away a $150,000 inheritance, and I was just following the Sermon on the Mount. I'm like, I was suffering. I'm like, I'm just going to give everything away and see what happens. So I gave away everything, and all I kept was my bike, and I decided to bike around just serving whoever needed something. And I said, I always like superheroes, so I'll dress up as a superhero. And I'm going to bike across the country, and anyone that I see 24/7, I'll help. And I named myself the Blazing Echidna. Echidna is a monotreme related to duck-billed platypus. It's a kind of non-violent animal. And by the end of the ride, 40 people had joined, and in that I gave all my money away, and the woman I thought I was going to marry, who was in medical school, left me. So after my great inspiration, I was homeless, and I had no girlfriend, and I had no money. I only had my bicycle. I was like, yeah, this is what happens. Suffering. But 6 months later, I met Sarah, who's now my beloved wife, and she met me, and I said, well, I don't go to movies or restaurants. I made a commitment that whenever I walk by the homeless, I'm going to be with them and eat with them, and I give all my money away. And she's like, it was all stars. It was all like in the good column. And I was like, I can't believe it. So our second date, we went to the coast. We biked to my favorite spot. And of course, we're getting off the Greyhound, and I still use public transportation. We're making our bikes, and a very intoxicated homeless man approaches us in Coos Bay. And my old girlfriend, whenever we would go out a few times, every time someone would come and I'd bring them to the restaurant to eat with us. And it would cause incredible suffering for my ex-partner. So I had all this past pain. He's walking up. I'm falling in love with this woman. I'm like, oh, and he walks up to me and asks for money. And my response is always, I don't want to just give you money, but we're about to eat. Why don't you eat with us? Let's meet each other. So I invite him to our picnic, and I'm thinking, this is the end. I'm going to be a monk. My whole family's convinced I'm just going to be a monk. I'm never going to get married. So we sit down. Sarah's totally quiet. He's intoxicated, smelling, spitting up food. I'm really enjoying the company, and I hug him, and Sarah hugs him, and she hasn't said a word, and we're walking away, and I think, that's it. And then she turned to me and said, this is the best date I've ever been on. And I was like, hallelujah. A Rumi says the door to love is the door of devastation. And in falling, you'll get wings. So when you jump to embody the world you want to see, I guarantee there will be great suffering, because your old self has to die, and that's what hurts. But when you close a door, 5 more will open that you'll never guess. So I was into solar power, and Sarah's like, why do we need electricity? I never asked that question, and I couldn't give her a good answer. So all of a sudden we're living by candlelight, and then on it went, and then we tried to create a project in Eugene, Oregon, and people were like, well, I want my green tea or I don't. We had people coming out of prison showing up on our doorstep, and someone who just held his brother at gunpoint, wanted by the police, showed up on our doorstep. Nobody wanted to live with us. And so we went on a pilgrimage by boat to Europe and found the Ark, which was a man who lived with Gandhi and then moved to Europe after World War II. And it was the most incredible place. I'd seen the kingdom and the queendom on earth. We walked up, and the first room was a room full of 3 tons of potatoes harvested by horse. Then there was 3 tons of wheat. Their tomato canning for 1 year was 1,500 quarts. We went into the room. Every bed was hand carved. Every curtain was woven by hand there. Meanwhile, they're doing a direct action on GMOs coming to France. One of the old-timers, Jean-Baptiste, was facing 10 years in prison, a 300,000 euro fine. And he came back and he's like, we've got their attention! And he's dancing and singing. And we watched them without the computer, with just a handful of people, reverse the GMO policy on a national level. So direct actions were happening. We were hosting Muslim families on the run after the riots in Paris. They all took vows of poverty. They gave away everything their institution had once a year on the Feast of St. Michael. Imagine they get 100,000 the day before, it's all given away. So every year they go to 0 to practice their faith. I don't see many nonprofits following that. And they 70 years old. It was amazing. So Sarah and I stayed there for almost 2 years, and then put up a prayer and found this 80 acres, which was before owned by the Amish. And that's how the project started 8 years ago, with no evidence what would happen. So this is a quote from Lanza, and it's another great permaculture quote. Work with your hands. Don't force others to work for you. Don't make others into slaves, even if you call them paid workers. Find the shortest, simplest way between the earth, the hands, and the mouth. Don't put anything in between. No money, no heavy machinery. Then you will know at once what are true needs and what are fantasies. When you have to sweat to satisfy your needs, you soon know whether or not it's worth your while. But if it's someone else's sweat, there is no end to our needs. We need cigarettes, cars, soft drinks, appliances, electronic devices, and on and on. Why not go the other way instead? If we want a more just world, let's just do it. Let's not wait until others do it. Do it yourself. Show that it is possible to live this way. Learn to do without, something they didn't teach you in university. If you become attached to goods, you'll have to defend them or have others defend them. So poverty is a crucial ornament of the movement. Learn how to celebrate. Prepare the feast from what your own hands have grown, and let it be magnificent.